there are two ways to get lost in the woods. The first is when you don't know where you are. But the second is much, much worse. It's when you know exactly where you are, but someone is making sure you can never get back. For me, that nightmare began with a 40-foot drop, a single fallen tree serving as my bridge to safety, and the sound of a stranger on the other side methodically chopping away my only path home. I screamed at him, asked him what the hell he was doing. He didn't even look up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped, looked me dead in the eyes. He was wrong. It was about to become his problem. I was the centerpiece of a twisted game he was playing. I just didn't know it yet. For the better part of 6 years, the wilderness was my sanctuary. Solo hiking wasn't just a hobby. It was how I connected with myself, a way to escape the noise of the city, the crowds, the constant pressure. I was comfortable enough to leave the marked trails behind, to find those remote, untouched places that most people never see. That feeling of true solitude, there's nothing else like it. That confidence, that love for the untraveled path is probably what got me into this situation in the first place. A situation that turned into one of those true nighttime horror stories you hear about. This happened last October in the wilds of West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. I'd driven up from Virginia for a long weekend, planning to hit some of the more remote sections that didn't see much traffic. The weather was perfect, cool, mid-50s, overcast, but with no threat of rain. It was the kind of day made for hiking, not the kind you'd associate with typical thunderstorm horror stories. I was looking forward to some real, uninterrupted solitude, the kind you hear about in terrifying camping horror stories, completely all alone. I was maybe 4 hours into the hike when I reached what I can only describe as a gorge. It wasn't some massive canyon like you'd see out west, but it was deep enough to be deadly. A 30 or 40-foot drop to a rocky bottom with a small creek running through it. A fall wouldn't guarantee death, but it would guarantee you'd be broken and trapped. The walls looked impossible to climb, all loose shale and jagged overhangs that would crumble under your weight. It felt like a scene from a video titled, "I Should Not Have Survived." But there was a bridge, a gift from nature, a massive fallen oak, wedged perfectly between both sides at a slight angle. The tree was thick, ancient. Its bark was worn smooth from years of weather and probably a few other hikers brave enough to use it. I spent a few minutes inspecting it, pushing on it with my boot, testing its strength to make sure it wouldn't shift under my weight. It seemed solid enough. I took my time getting across, my focus absolute. Every step was deliberate. The world shrank too. Just that narrow beam of wood beneath my feet, the dizzying drop on either side. My heart was pounding, but it was a thrill. The kind of focused calm that comes when you're facing a small, manageable danger. When my boots finally touched the solid ground on the other side, a wave of adrenaline and relief washed over me. It was that pure, exhilarating feeling of conquering a challenge. I took a deep, satisfied breath, a smile on my face as I took in the silence of the forest around me, a perfect moment before the real-life horror story began. But the silence didn't last. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A steady, heavy, rhythmic thunk, thunk, coming from the side I had just left. At first, I thought it might be a woodpecker, but the sound was heavier, deeper. It had a weight to it that felt human. I turned around and my blood ran cold. This was not a creepy encounter with a cryptid. This was something far more real and terrifying. The beginning of my own personal chapter of true scary stories.
There was a man on the other side of the gorge, maybe 10 feet from where the tree met the bank. He was older, definitely in his 50s, wearing a ratty camo jacket and old-looking jeans. He had a scraggly beard that made him look like some stereotypical lumberjack. It took me a second to realize what he was holding. It was a full-sized axe, and he was swinging it with a steady, practiced rhythm right at the base of the tree I had just crossed. My mind just couldn't process it. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, watching him. He was methodically chopping into the very thing that connected these two sides of the gorge. He swung the axe as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Each heavy swing landed with a sickening crunch, sending splinters of wood flying. I could see the cut in the tree growing deeper with every blow. I finally found my voice shouting across the gap, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Stop!" He didn't even glance up at me. It was like I didn't exist. He just kept swinging. Dunk, dunk, dunk. The sound echoed through the quiet forest, a terrifying drumbeat marking the destruction of my only way back. It was a hiker's worst nightmare, a real-life hiking horror story unfolding before my eyes. I yelled louder, my voice laced with a mix of anger and rising panic. "Stop it! I just crossed on that thing." It dawned on me that he probably already knew that. This wasn't random. He was trying to strand me on this side. My escape route was being destroyed, one swing at a time, and I was being trapped by a psycho in the wilderness with absolutely nothing I could do about it. To my horror, I watched as one of his swings landed deeper than the others, lodging the axe head in the wood. The massive oak tree, the very thing that had felt so solid beneath my feet just minutes ago, shifted with a deep groan. It was a slight movement, maybe only an inch, but it was enough to send a shockwave of pure terror through me. That was no longer a bridge. It was a trap waiting to spring. This was quickly turning into a confrontation with a madman. "I said stop," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I just crossed that. Are you insane?" It was then that it fully dawned on me. This man knew. He had to have known. He must have been watching me, waiting for me to get to the other side. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was personal. He was trapping me here for what I couldn't imagine, and that was the most terrifying part. This was becoming a true scary story from the woods. With my only way back being systematically destroyed, a surge of desperate anger took over. I started yelling, increasingly insulting things at him, things that didn't even make sense, a stream of pure, unfiltered rage pouring out of me. I called him every name I could think of, my voice echoing across the gorge. Finally, in the last-ditch effort, I screamed, "I need to get back to the other side. You have to stop." And that's when he finally looked up at me. He paused, his hand still on the axe handle, and lifted his head. His eyes met mine across the chasm. He didn't look angry or crazy. He looked indifferent. He spoke, and his voice was so casual it was unnerving. It carried easily across the quiet air. "That's not my problem." He said it so simply, so calmly, like I had just asked him about the weather. I don't know why, but that casual dismissal, that complete lack of concern for my situation, infuriated me more than the act of chopping the tree itself. I absolutely lost it. I started full-on screaming at him. A raw, primal roar of fury and fear. I said some truly nasty things you should never say to a stranger, holding an axe in the middle of nowhere. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the brightest decision, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was a cornered animal facing the predator in the woods. I can't remember exactly what I said in that tirade, but something must have hit a nerve. because he stopped swinging the axe abruptly. He pulled it free from the wood, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to come after me somehow, but instead he did something even stranger. He calmly set the axe down on the ground beside him. Then he took a few slow, deliberate steps closer to the edge of the gorge. Now that he was closer, I could see his face more clearly, and it was not a pleasant sight. His eyes were the worst part. They were sunken and dark, almost like the skin around them was bruised or stained, giving him a hollowed-out, haunted look. This was the face of a true deep woods horror. He leaned over the edge slightly, his gaze fixed on me, and told me something that I will never forget. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, but filled with an unshakable certainty. "I know these woods a lot better than you do." Something about the way he said it terrified me more than anything else that had happened. It wasn't an overt threat. It was a statement of fact, a fact that he knew I'd be stupid to argue with. It was a declaration of ownership, a sentence that promised, "You're not leaving these woods alive." He wasn't just a man in the woods, he was a part of them, and I was an intruder in his domain. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, the silence broken only by the sound of the creek far below. His dark, empty eyes seemed to look right through me. Then, just as suddenly as he had stopped, he picked up his axe, turned his back on me without another word, and walked back into the dense trees, disappearing as silently as he had appeared. This had become an isolated and alone horror story, and I was the main character. I didn't say anything after him. What was there to say? I just stood there, my heart pounding against my ribs, trying to process what had just happened. The tree was still wedged in place, but I could see the deep splintered gash his axe had left. It was clearly unstable. I wanted to cross back to the other side right then and there, to run back to my car and never look back, but there was no way I was entrusting my weight to that tree now. One wrong step, one shift in the wood, and I'd be at the bottom of the gorge. My hand instinctively went to my pocket for my phone. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling with the lock screen. As I expected but dreaded to see, 0 bars, no service, of course. I decided right then to cut the hike short. My anger was still simmering, but underneath it, a genuine and profound fear was taking root. I think anyone else in my position would have felt it, too. Something about that disturbing encounter with a stranger felt fundamentally wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. It wasn't just a crazy man. It was something more calculated, more predatory. I had no choice. I started walking downstream along the edge of the gorge. My logic was simple. Eventually, I'd find another crossing, or the gorge would become shallow enough to climb down and back up. Either way, following the water would eventually lead me back in the direction I'd come from. But I was dead wrong. And as I took my first steps away from the damaged oak tree, deeper into this unknown territory, I had the chilling feeling that I was doing exactly what he wanted me to do. I was being hunted in a national forest. I walked for what must have been an hour, maybe more. Time in the woods, especially when you're on edge, has a way of stretching and compressing. My initial simple plan was failing spectacularly. This was no longer just a hike. It was the start of a true survival horror story. With every step I took, the gorge to my left only seemed to get deeper, its walls steeper and more treacherous. The gap between my side and the other was widening too. The hope of finding an easy crossing was dwindling with the daylight. To make matters worse, the sun was starting to drop. The overcast sky, which had been a comfort earlier, now began to feel oppressive as it smothered the last of the afternoon light. The temperature began to fall, and a cold dread began to seep into my bones, a dread far colder than the evening air. Panic, the real, heart-pounding kind, was beginning to set in. I was miles from my car, stranded on the wrong side of an impassable gorge and heading in the opposite direction of where I needed to go. It was getting dark, the perfect setup for a terrifying night in the woods. I started seriously considering the insane option of climbing down into the gorge and back out. I'd glance over the edge, my stomach lurching at the sight of the jagged rocks below, and try to map a possible route. It was a suicidal idea, but as the shadows deepened, it was starting to feel like my only choice. I was weighing the certain risk of a fall against the unknown terror of spending a night in these woods, a night with the memory of that man's hollow eyes fresh in my mind. This was a true lost in the wilderness scenario. Just as I was about to give in to that desperate plan, I stumbled into a small clearing, and in the center of it, I saw a fire pit. At first, a wave of immense relief washed over me. A campsite. It looked recently used, with charred logs and a faint smoky smell still hanging in the air. Maybe there was another camper here, someone who could help me, someone with a map or at least a friendly face. The thought of not being alone was intoxicating. But the more I looked around, the more that feeling of relief curdled into a deep primal wrongness. This was no ordinary campsite. This was a disturbing discovery in the woods. The first thing I noticed were the trees surrounding the clearing. There were carvings on them, but not the usual kind. Not initials carved inside a heart or a date marking a memory. These were deep, angry gouges in the bark, forming strange symbols and patterns I didn't recognize. They looked less like graffiti and more like creepy ritualistic markings, a warning or a claim of territory. Then I saw the other objects, scattered around the clearing like relics of some forgotten, twisted religion. Rusted, archaic-looking tools lay half-buried in the dirt. Scraps of dirty cloth were tied to low-hanging branches fluttering gently in the breeze. And then I saw the bones. Small animal bones. Birds, squirrels, maybe, arranged in deliberate, unsettling patterns on the ground. It was freaky. This wasn't a place of rest. It was a shrine to something dark, like a scene from a search and rescue horror story. The feeling of being watched, which had been a low hum in the back of my mind since my encounter with the man, suddenly became a deafening roar. As soon as I saw that stuff, I didn't hesitate. I hightailed it out of there. I didn't just walk away. I practically ran, pushing through the undergrowth, my mind screaming at me to put as much distance as possible between myself and that clearing. The fear I'd felt at the gorge was nothing compared to this. This was a place that felt profoundly evil, a true forbidden place you should never visit. And then, as if my situation couldn't possibly get any worse, I started hearing it. A sound behind me, the distinct crunch of dry leaves under a heavy foot. The footsteps in the dark every horror movie warns you about. I froze, straining my ears, my own breathing sounding like a hurricane in the sudden silence. Nothing. I took another tentative step, and there it was again. Crunch. Something was following me. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, startled by my sudden flight. but I knew it wasn't. The sound was too deliberate. It was matching my pace. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps behind me picked up their pace too. I stopped abruptly. The footsteps stopped. The woods would fall completely unnaturally silent. I'd start walking, and a few seconds later the footsteps would start again. This wasn't a deer. This was something intelligent, something that was stalking me. I was being hunted through the woods. I picked up my pace, breaking into a jog, hoping whatever was behind me would lose interest or be unable to keep up. But no. If anything, the sounds only got louder and, honestly, a little closer. The snap of a twig here, the rustle of a bush there. It was no longer trying to be subtle. The game was over. The hunt was on. What happened next is still the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. My frantic jog was becoming a clumsy, panicked scramble through the darkening woods. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves behind me was a jolt of pure adrenaline. I fought the urge to look back, clinging to the irrational hope that if I didn't see it, it wasn't real. But the sounds grew bolder, the presence behind me more certain. It was no longer a single set of footsteps, but a collection of noises, a subtle but undeniable sense of multiple pursuers, like something out of a Wrong Turn horror movie. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. As soon as I heard the next sound, a heavy footfall, much too close for comfort, I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was a fleeting glimpse, a snapshot of horror burned into my memory. For a fraction of a second, I saw a human form, tall and lanky, ducking behind the thick trunk of a tree. A person. My worst fear was confirmed. I froze, my feet feeling like they were cemented to the forest floor. My eyes scanned the trees, desperately trying to get another look, and that's when the true, mind-shattering scope of my situation became clear. It wasn't just one. There was another figure further to the left, a dark shape moving between the trees. Then another to my right. They weren't just following me anymore. They had fanned out. They were herding me, using the deep gorge on my left as a natural barrier to funnel me in a direction of their choosing. This was a coordinated hunt, and I was the prey. It was a terrifying moment of realization. They're toying with me before the kill. I don't know what made me realize they'd given up on hiding, but suddenly the pretense of stealth was gone. I could hear them moving more openly now, crashing through the undergrowth, no longer concerned with being quiet. The hunt had entered its final stage. Through a gap in the foliage, I saw one of them raise an arm, and in their hand I saw the dull glint of something long and metallic. It looked like a pipe or a club. And that was it. That was the switch that flipped in my brain. The sight of a weapon. This wasn't a game. They weren't trying to scare me. They were going to hurt me, or worse. I couldn't play dumb any longer. Couldn't pretend this was some misunderstanding. The exact thing I was dreading the moment I knew this was a life or death situation was happening. This was the moment the fun and games were over. I was living a real-life chase scene from a horror movie, and there was only one thing to do. I just started running. Not jogging, not scrambling. I ran with a desperation I have never felt before or since. I ran faster than I knew I could, fueled by a primal terror that eclipsed reason, pain, and exhaustion. Branches whipped at my face, cutting my skin. Roots and rocks seemed to grab at my ankles, trying to trip me, to deliver me to the things behind me. My lungs burned, each breath a ragged, painful gasp. I could hear them chasing after me now, their heavy footfalls pounding the earth, a terrifying chorus of pursuit. Then one of them started to scream. It wasn't a scream of words, it wasn't a yell. It was that unhuman scream you hear in the woods, that everyone talks about in scary stories, a high-pitched guttural shriek that tore through the fabric of the silent woods. A war cry, the kind of sound you hear in nightmares, a sound of pure, unrestrained violence. The scream seemed to fuel the others, and I could hear them crashing through the brush with renewed vigor. I kept running, my mind a blank slate of pure terror. The gorge was still a black, gaping void on my left, my silent companion in this horrifying chase. I felt myself slowing down, my muscles screaming in protest, my lungs feeling like they were about to be burst. I was losing steam. They were going to catch me. I was going to die here, in the dark, at the hands of these feral humans of the forest. Just as I felt my legs begin to buckle, just as I thought it was all over, I saw it through the trees up ahead, another fallen log. It was much smaller than the first one had been, a thinner, less certain-looking bridge across the chasm. But I didn't have a choice. There was no time to think, no time to inspect it for stability. Without breaking my stride, I veered toward it. Thinking about it now, I was betting my entire life on a rotting piece of wood, a desperate last-second gamble in what had become my own personal story of how I survived a real-life horror game. It was a tense, heart-stopping moment as I mounted it, my tired legs shaking, my balance precarious. I was so exhausted that I honestly thought I was going to... There, on the edge of the gorge I had just escaped, 3 figures emerged from the gloom of the forest. They weren't shadowy figures anymore. In the dying light, I could see them clearly, and the sight was chilling. They looked like something straight out of a backwoods horror story. They were all carbon copies of the first man, the one with the axe, dressed in the same kind of ragged, dirty clothes with the same lanky frames and unsettling, hollowed-out look in their eyes. One of them was, in fact, holding a length of rusted pipe, gripping it like a club. They stood there, breathing heavily from the chase, their eyes locked on me with a menacing intensity in this terrifying face-to-face with my stalkers. The first one, the one without a weapon, stepped forward and put a hand on the end of the log I had just crossed, as if he was going to follow. My heart leaped into my throat. The log was much smaller than the first one. I wasn't sure it could take their weight, but I wasn't willing to find out. He put some pressure on it then. For some reason, he stepped back down. He looked at the other 2, then back at me. The 3 of them just stood there, staring at me across the chasm, their expressions a mixture of fury and frustration. It was the hunter's rage at losing its prey at the end of a deadly game of cat and mouse. For some reason, I found myself unable to move again, frozen in place by their collective, hateful stare. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Then one of them spoke, his voice a low, gravelly snarl that cut through the air. "Get the hell out of here," he growled. "You got lucky." That was all I needed to hear. Those words broke the spell. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and did exactly what they told me to. I ran. I didn't look back again. I just plunged into the unfamiliar woods on this new side of the gorge, running on pure adrenaline and the lingering terror of their promise in my own personal story of how I escaped my hunters. I kept expecting to hear them behind me, to hear the sound of them finding another way across, resuming the chase. But the forest had gotten eerily quiet again. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my own footsteps. The darkness didn't help. It was nearly pitch black now, and the woods became a maze of unseen obstacles. There were a couple of times when I tripped and fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, and I had to fight a full-on breakdown, forcing myself back to my feet, convinced they were right behind me. It was a desperate escape in the dark. I must have run at an angle that eventually brought me back toward the trailhead.
Or maybe I just got impossibly, unbelievably lucky. I don't know how long I was running. Maybe an hour, maybe more. But eventually, I stumbled out of the tree line and onto a familiar, worn path. The trail. I've never been so happy to see a simple dirt path in my entire life. I followed it, half running, half stumbling,
until I saw the blessed sight of the parking lot through the trees. This was the end of my nightmare in the National Forest. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock the car door. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, hyperventilating the reality of what I had just survived crashing down on me all at once. I reported what I could after, driving back home, making a call from the safety of my own house. I told them about a man trying to trap me, about being chased. But I knew there was nothing anyone could or would do. I couldn't give them a precise location. I couldn't give them a clear description beyond scruffy, older men in the woods. It was just a crazy story from a spooked hiker, another one of those unbelievable short, scary stories. It's been months now. I still hike, but it's honestly not as enjoyable anymore. That sense of peace and solitude I used to crave is gone, replaced by a constant nagging paranoia. Every snap of a twig, every shadow that seems out of place sends my heart racing. This story is a warning to all hikers. I really hope I start enjoying it again, because hiking used to be my absolute favorite thing to do. Now, I can't even enjoy it without thinking about that experience, my own true scary hiking horror story. It was just so freaky. That first guy with the axe especially. The way he looked at me. The way he said those things. As if he knew exactly what was going to happen to me. He probably did. Hell, he had probably orchestrated it all. He wasn't just a man with an axe. He was the gatekeeper to their hunting ground, and I had just walked right in through the gate. It terrifies me to think that I might have lost my life that day, lost to the woods and the twisted game of the men who called it home, a group of human predators in the wilderness. I got lucky, and after that day, I know for a fact that I should be dead right now.